The United States Senate Foreign Relations Committee will come to order. We have, as usual, a little turmoil this morning as we have a business meeting to start with. We have on the agenda 3 noms, which we've previously heard. Then we're going to go to a policy hearing on transnational criminal organizations in the Americas. And since we have a quorum to proceed with voting, we are going to take up the nomination of John Arrigo of Florida to be ambassador to the Portuguese Republic. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded, perhaps? Seconded, that we send Mr. Arrigo to the floor with a due pass recommendation. Is there debate? There'd be no debate.
I'd like a roll call vote.
Senator Shaheen has asked for a roll call vote. That will be granted, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Ricketts? Aye. Mr. McCormick? Aye. Mr. Daines? Aye by proxy.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Haggerty? Aye by proxy.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Barrasso? Aye. Mr. Lee? Aye by proxy.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Paul? Aye. Mr. Cruz? Aye by proxy.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Scott? Aye. Mr. Curtis? Aye. Mr. Corman? Aye. Mrs. Shaheen?
Aye.
Mr. Coons?
No.
Mr. Murphy?
No.
Mr. Kane?
No.
Mr. Merkley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Booker?
No by proxy.
Mr. Schatz?
No by proxy.
Mr. Van Hollen?
No by proxy.
Ms. Duckworth?
No by proxy.
Ms. Rosen?
No by proxy. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just reading from my list.
You'll be recorded as no
Very good.
in person.
Mr. Chairman?
Aye. Clerk to report.
Mr. Chairman, the yeas are 13, the noes are 9.
The motion has passed, and Mr. Arrigo will be sent to the floor with the due pass. We now have Christine Toretti of Pennsylvania to be ambassador to the Kingdom of Sweden. Is there a motion to send her to the floor?
So moved.
It's been moved. Seconded? Second. And that we send her to the floor with the due pass recommendation. Is there debate?
No, but I'd like a roll call.
And Senator Shaheen has asked for a roll call vote. There'll be a roll call vote, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Ricketts? Aye. Mr. McCormick? Aye. Mr. Daines? Aye by proxy.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Haggerty?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Barrasso? Aye. Mr. Lee? Aye by proxy.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Paul? Aye. Mr. Cruz? Aye by proxy.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Scott? Aye. Mr. Curtis? Aye. Mr. Corman? Aye. Mrs. Shaheen?
Aye.
Mr. Coons?
No.
Mr. Murphy? No. Mr. Kane? Aye. Mr. Merkley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Booker?
No by proxy.
Mr. Schatz?
No by proxy.
Mr. Van Hollen?
No by proxy.
Ms. Duckworth?
No by proxy.
Ms. Rosen? Mr. Chairman?
Aye. Senator Daines, did you want to be recorded in present? Senator Daines will be recorded aye in person. The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, the yeas are 15 and the noes are 7.
Motion has passed, and Ms. Toretti will be referred to the floor with a due pass recommendation. The last one we have on the calendar is Michael G. Waltz. There's been a request to hold this. I'm going to recess the Business Committee meeting until further notice as we consider Mr. Waltz further. With that, we will move to the business meeting. And I've been reminded, we want to welcome everyone in the audience who's here to be with us today. We're always glad to have you. As is well known in this committee, there is zero tolerance for interruption. That is, anyone attempting to communicate, to protest here in the committee, or communicate with either any members of the committee or the witnesses will be immediately removed by law enforcement that is here, be arrested, and banned from the committee for a year. And so with that, we will proceed to the hearing on the subject matter before the committee here today. What we're going to do is Senator Shaheen and I, assuming she returns. Oh, there she
I'm
is.
here.
I'm going to make an opening statement for a few minutes. Senator Shaheen will do likewise. We'll then hear from our guests, and thank you so much for being here today. After we're done with that, we will proceed to a round of questions and hopefully have a good airing of this important issue that's before our committee today. And that issue today is the tragic drug epidemic that we have that has scourged the country today. Thousands of Americans die from an overdose every year. Overdoses continue to rise. In 2023, there were 264 deaths related to opioids in my home state of Idaho, and half of those deaths involved fentanyl. I suspect the numbers are very similar in other states around the United States. Tragically, other synthetic opioids and cocaine also wreak havoc on communities across the country. I want to be clear, though more could always be done to curb illicit drug use in the United States, these deaths are the result of two of America's foremost adversaries, China and the transnational criminal organizations, uniting against us to pump these drugs into our country and make a profit, take money out of America, all at the expense of American lives. Today, we will examine the threat posed by these transnational criminal organizations to the security of our country and the stability of the Western Hemisphere. Mexican cartels and Colombian criminal organizations are the main source of synthetic opiates and cocaine driving U.S. overdose deaths. But the cartels are only able to make these drugs with the help of China. China, America's greatest competitor, provides significant tax incentives to domestic producers of fentanyl precursors and allows those producers to export freely to the U.S. and to Mexico. You heard that right. China is subsidizing the fentanyl that flows across our borders and kills Americans. The Chinese government's tacit endorsement of this massive drug trade is a huge issue, and we have worked to take substantial actions, but more must be done. The Biden administration touted China's false progress on this, and China is still unwilling to do what is needed to stop the flow of chemicals to our hemisphere. Neither of those were helpful. In addition, the rapid growth of Chinese money launderers funds not just Mexican drug traffickers, but also a growing cyber scam industry that steals billions from Americans. All of this is interconnected. We can and must do more to hold these Chinese actors accountable. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that recently Mexico has taken positive measures, such as extraditing several senior cartel members to the U.S. and its deployment of armed forces to secure its borders. But these are small steps compared to what needs to be done, and much more action is needed, and it must be done much faster to save American lives. As one example, the cartels might take in as much as $500 billion annually, but Mexican authorities reported just $2.6 billion in fraudulent transactions for the 3 years between 2019 and 2021. It's simply unbelievable that the Mexican government has not been able to track the other $497 billion that are tied up in this illegal industry. It's open knowledge that the cartels leverage their profits to acquire sophisticated weapons, commit horrible atrocities. They murder, extort, kidnap, and torture those who stand in their way, and in some cases, people who are just in the wrong place at the wrong time. As part of these operations, the cartels challenge the Mexican government, and as of late have expanded their reach across our hemisphere, even into Europe. This situation is growing worse, and it is not getting better, and it's growing worse faster. This all needs to quit. With that, I'll turn it over to the ranking, to the ranking member, Senator Sheen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witnesses today. The United States has had a long bipartisan tradition of combating drug cartels, but despite decades of different approaches and billions in investment, criminal cartels are as strong as ever today. They have expanded beyond drugs to operate illicit multi-billion-dollar networks across international borders, including our own. They smuggle migrants and illegally mine gold. They run scams and launder profits using cryptocurrencies. And they use violence, as the chairman has said, to terrorize communities, not only across Latin America, but across much of the world. He mentioned Mexico. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, since 2018, Cartels have killed more than 30,000 people a year there. The instability that cartels create has far-reaching consequences. It damages democratic and legal institutions. It threatens human rights, especially women. It puts pressure on people across Latin America to migrate to safety, and it allows deadly drugs like fentanyl to flood American communities. As you heard from the chairman, he and I both take this threat very seriously. We've worked together to introduce legislation to curb fentanyl imports from China. But unfortunately, recent administration policies have undermined our ability to pressure China to follow through on its commitment to stem the flow of precursor chemicals. Last week, the Foreign Relations Committee released a minority report detailing China's gains in the wake of the Trump administration program cuts. And one of the findings that I hope that you all, as testifying this morning, will address is that after the administration eliminated counter-narcotics and law enforcement programs, China pledged to deepen its law enforcement trainings across the Western Hemisphere. And that's concerning because China isn't just trying to fight drug trafficking or combat transnational crime groups. It's also working to influence how these countries conduct police operations and write laws in a way that favors Beijing. Things like relaxing anti-corruption efforts. Cartels thrive in environments of weak financial oversight and off-the-books deals. So relaxing the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or eliminating the anti-corruption coordinator, those are wins for the cartels as well as for China. Taking on transnational criminal organizations is no easy task, as I'm sure you will speak to today. Cutting successful U.S. programs doesn't help, like the USAID program in Colombia, which steered young people away from joining these criminal groups, cutting off a key source of labor and support for cartels over the long term. Another successful example was Guatemala's program for incinerating fentanyl precursor chemicals, supported by the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement at the State Department. If we're serious about fighting global criminal groups, we need to work with our allies. They share our concerns, and they're stepping up. Canada, for example, has appointed a fentanyl czar at the request, in negotiations, I should say, with President Trump. And with the right policies, the United States can confront the threat that's posed by transnational criminal organizations. I appreciate that we are holding this hearing today. Thank you both for being here. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. In March, I authored a bill called the Bust Fentanyl Act. The bill will crack down on the import of deadly fentanyl and its precursors flowing from China to Mexico and across our borders. And it will leverage the economic might of the U.S. against Chinese financial institutions that facilitate the export of these drugs that harm our communities. I want to thank the ranking member for co-authoring that bill with me. I appreciate it. Senator Hagerty and Senator Coons are also co-sponsors of the bill. We've sent it to the Senate floor out of this committee. Unfortunately, it's gotten high-centered. It's cleared the hotline on the Republican side. I'm hoping that the minority will clear the hotline in not too distant future, and we can send it on its way to the House of Representatives. So that's where we are with that. We have two distinguished witnesses with us today that are going to help us out. And I was just handed this morning the quarterly report that that Congress is supposed to put out on this issue that's before us today. Have you seen this? Have either of you seen this report? This is the most recent one. It just came out today, so not surprising that you haven't seen it. And I'm going to put a copy of this into the record. But in the meantime, Mr. Urben, and Ms. Felbab-Brown are here with us today. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Christopher Urben. He's the Managing Director at Nardello and Company, leading international money laundering and threat finance investigations in Americas. Mr. Urben served as a special agent and senior official in the Drug Enforcement Administration for over 25 years, working on investigations into transnational criminal organizations and international money laundering and threat to our financial networks. Mr. Urben, we'd like to hear from you. Please, if you keep it to about 5 minutes, we'll put any other if you have a lengthy statement, we'll be happy to put it in the record. And when you're done, we'll hear from Ms. Felbab-Brown, and then we'll have questions. So with that, Mr. Urben, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Risch and Ranking Member Shaheen and distinguished members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to address you today on the important task of dismantling transnational criminal organizations in the Americas. While we have made significant headway in the recent months in reducing the deadly flow of fentanyl and other dangerous drugs into this country from Mexico, Mexican cartels and other TCOs represent a persistent threat to national security. In addition, Chinese money laundering organizations, CMLOs, continue to play a dominant role in laundering cartel proceeds. New authorities granted by Congress and the Trump administration's vigorous use of existing authorities are making a difference. But these efforts would be further enhanced by additional international engagement with and cooperation by Mexico, other countries in the Americas that are affected by TCOs, and certainly China. I saw firsthand the damage done by the international trade of fentanyl and other deadly drugs during my 24 or 25-year career as an agent and executive with the DEA. Over the last 5 years of my career, I led a team at DEA's Special Operations Division, SOD, that sought to understand, identify, target, and dismantle CMLOs, which are transforming narcotics trafficking by offering dramatically lower rates, lower risk, and quicker return of funds than networks that had laundered money previously for these TCOs. My time at SOD led me to conclude that the U.S. law enforcement community and the U.S. financial system needed significant new authority, guidance, and resources to understand and combat the threat posed by the TCOs and CMLOs. My conclusions have been reinforced since joining Nardello & Co., the global investigation firm. Late last month, the U.S. Department of Treasury issued the first designations under the Fendoff Act, concluding that 3 Mexican financial institutions were of a primary money laundering concern. While I am not familiar with the facts underlying those designations, I can report that the designations have had a significant effect on those institutions and on others that now have to come to terms with their potential exposure to designation under the Fendoff Act. Similarly, the Trump administration's February 2025 designation of several Mexican cartels and other TCOs operating in the Americas as foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs, is forcing businesses to make further enhancements to their internal and AML programs and to revisit their operations in Mexico. While the private sector is responding to FTO and Fendoff Act designations, further engagement with authorities in Mexico is required to truly dismantle and eliminate the cartels. In February of 2025, Mexico handed over to the United States 29 leaders and managers of the Mexican cartels. As we learned from our successful fight against cartels in Colombia, when cartel members understand that they will face justice for their crimes in the United States instead of their own country's judicial system, it has an effect where it drastically impacts their ability to operate. Mexico's handover of the 29 leaders and managers sends a strong message to the cartels, yet hundreds of other potentially extraditable cartel leaders and managers in Mexico and other Latin American countries remain at liberty, free, or are incarcerated under conditions that allows them to still continue committing those crimes. While the focus of this hearing is against TCO in the Americas, the U.S. government cannot be successful in that fight without targeting entities with operations in China, including Chinese money laundering organizations, Chinese financial institutions, apps, WeChat, for example, and manufacturers of fentanyl precursor chemicals. Right now, CMLOs transfer huge amounts of funds with no money ever crossing borders by taking advantage of the existence of Chinese capital controls, a global Chinese diaspora, and encrypted apps, again, WeChat. Chinese financial institutions, as well as U.S. and Mexican financial institutions, facilitate the movement of these funds. Chinese chemical manufacturers supply a large portion, the dominant portion, of precursor chemicals that are used by the cartels to manufacture fentanyl. Congress can play a vital role in providing resources, incentives, and authority for the federal government to engage effectively with other nations while engaging in intensive enforcement operations to combat this threat. Thank you for the opportunity to engage on this topic today.
Well, thank you, Mr. Urben. It's enlightening, and your experience of 25 years of chasing this is certainly something that's respected, and we appreciate your opinions on this. Ms. Vanda, Felbab-Brown is the director of the Initiative on Non-State Armed Actors, the co-director of the Africa Security Initiative, and a senior fellow in the Strove Talbot Center for Security, Strategy, and Technology at the Brookings Institution. Ms. Felbab-Brown specializes in international and internal conflicts and non-traditional security threats, including insurgency, organized crime, urban violence, and illicit economies. Quite a broad spectrum. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we'd like to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Chairman Risch, Ranking Member Shaheen, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to address you today. I am a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, but I'm speaking today solely on my behalf in my personal capacity as a scholar who has studied criminal groups and policies to counter them for 25 years. I do not speak for Brookings. As you have highlighted, transnational criminal groups pose significant threats to the United States, as well as governments and societies around the world. The lethality of synthetic drugs, the violence of many criminal groups in Latin America, and the diversification of transnational criminal groups into many other illegal and legal economies beyond drug trafficking have pushed these threats to new heights. Several important trends characterize transnational criminal groups in our hemisphere. Their international reach has gravely expanded around the globe. The economic activities are highly diversified and now span logging, mining, fisheries, retail, transportation, wildlife trade and trafficking, not just in the illegal domains, but also in the legal domains. Such diversification not only strengthens these groups economically and makes it difficult for law enforcement to target them and dismantle them, but it also increases their ability to control powerful business interests in other countries. And finally, global drug markets are undergoing a synthetic drugs revolution that is significantly changing criminal patterns and making it profoundly difficult for law enforcement and public health authorities to effectively address those changes. In its most lethal and devastating manifestation, this is fentanyl in the United States, increasingly highly potent methamphetamine in the United States, but variety of synthetic drugs with high potency, high lethality are spreading around the world. Mexican and Chinese criminal groups are particularly significant as a threat to the United States in this domain. The López Obrador administration destroyed cooperation with the United States and gave a carte blanche to the cartels. Since October 1st, 2024, the Sheinbaum administration in Mexico significantly increased law enforcement activities. Chinese criminal networks are the suppliers of precursor chemicals to Mexican cartels and to other criminal groups, as are also Indian brokers. After several years of no cooperation between China and the United States, the Biden administration in 2024 succeeded in restarting cooperation with China. China scheduled dozens of precursors, drugs such as nitazines, cooperated in anti-money laundering measures, shared intelligence with the United States, and responded to intelligence. The cooperation featured significant gaps that remain today and need to be part of the bilateral conversation with China. Countering transnational criminal groups requires a comprehensive and multifaceted approach. Law enforcement actions need to be well-designed and strictly operate within rule of law. But alone, they are not sufficient. A broader system and culture of rule of law need to be fostered. So what are some of the critical elements? One is crucial law enforcement actions that cannot simply focus on the top heads of the cartels or their lowest operators, but need to crucially focus on the middle operational layer of criminal groups, such as by going after the money laundering networks and the money laundering operators. It is important to recognize the limits and counterproductive effects of mass imprisoning of drug users and low-level dealers. But it is insufficient to go simply after the drug component of TCO's operations. It is equally crucial to focus on their mining activities, on their activities in logging, their takeover of legal economies, and going after their wildlife trafficking operations. This requires highly specialized and coordinated law enforcement units. Going after these activities also provides expanded opportunities for intelligence gathering on the political masters and overlords of criminal groups and their foreign connections, including to state entities. But law enforcement will be ineffective if it operates in a culture and institutional setting of corruption and patronage, and if there is an absence of apolitical independent legal systems that make sure that prosecutions are successfully seen to sentencing and penalties. If judges are politically manipulated or intimidated by criminals, law enforcement will not be effective. Law enforcement also be accountable and strictly operate within rules of due process, civil liberties, and human rights, and needs to be complemented by other strategies such as well-designed, effective policies to reduce economic importance of illicit economies, to facilitate civil society, investigative journalism, and oversight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Both of you have a lot of knowledge in this area, and we'd like to ask some questions. We're going to have a round of questions right now. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Urben. The statistic that was shocking to me was the fact that that there is so much money in the billions coming in every year, hundreds of billions into Mexico, and yet the Mexican government is reporting just $2.5 billion identified or recovered. How is that possible? I mean, it's just the gap there just seems so wide.
So it's certainly a gap. I think it's a focus and capability that they have that we need to help stand up. I think there's a completely new opportunity in terms of engaging with Mexico. The amount of money that the cartels make that flows into Mexico through Chinese money launderers is a very sophisticated operation that's dramatically shifted over the last 5 to 7 years in terms of the way it's layered into the accounts, the fact that monies don't cross borders. It's essentially 3 different giant pots of money, one within the United States, one within Mexico, and one within China, that allows for these laundering of funds back to the Mexican cartels. I think for going forward under this new opportunity to engage the cartels, and when I say new opportunity, we have new authorities, we have new resources that we're going to apply to them. Not only do we need to stand up those capabilities within Mexico, but in the short term, we can use these new authorities like the Fendolf Act to sanction, pre-sanction, whether it's a Chinese financial institution, a Mexican financial institution, a Mexican company, a Mexican individual. We can shorten the gap in terms of enforcement or activities that negate their ability to launder money.
So how much of it actually travels through the United States? Obviously, it's easier to grab this stuff as it goes through the U.S. versus Mexico and China, I gather.
So there's a variety of different choke points that we can identify and target. I think within the United States, it's important to understand that every dollar or every component of the fentanyl trade that's sold here, there's a dollar on the streets in the United States. So we have what I called home field advantage, right? There's an opportunity to attack that cash, that's the proceeds of the sales of fentanyl and other drugs, obviously, of the Mexican cartels, that wind up initially on the streets of the United States for every dollar sold, right? So when those dollars, that bulk cash is then laundered into our banking system, that's where there's an asymmetrical vulnerability for the Mexican cartels, because that bulk cash is right here before it's laundered into the system. So we should be attacking that bulk cash more as a priority by law enforcement.
Are we doing that well or not at all? How would you classify our efforts in that regard?
So I think we need to do it better, right? I think that we've gotten a lot better at it because that threat has been transformed in terms of how the monies are laundered, right? The old black market peso exchange was easier to target, right? So let me essentially give the comparison real quick. When I had an undercover money laundering team 10, 15 years ago that targeted the black market peso exchange, that was controlled by Colombian brokers. You could wiretap the network, right? We could conduct wiretaps to gather evidence and take that network down. It was much easier to track in terms of the financial system because there were wire transfers that happened within our banking system, and you can, again, track the money. Chinese money launderers are much more sophisticated in the sense that, one, they conduct all their business on WeChat, right? Obviously, that's an encrypted communication system that's controlled from mainland China. We can't wiretap it. We can't, through judicial process subpoenas, acquire that data or those transaction records or communications. So it's a complete blind spot that allows Chinese money launderers to move money, whether it's in this country, and there's Chinese brokers in all three countries that control this process, US, Mexico, and mainland China. So we're not able to identify the network at scale and then utilize our limited resources in law enforcement to attack the network and essentially prosecute them. Second part of this is, as that threat has been transformed, is we were limited in terms of understanding it initially. In 2018, I took over the money laundering team out of SOD that began to understand this and gather intelligence. The intelligence has been much more enriched over the last 2-3 years, so I think whether it's the Department of Justice, Treasury, or other components of the executive branch can now go after Chinese money launderers on a much more dramatic scale in terms of racketeering type charges, continuing criminal enterprise, and take down the networks and the command and control leadership that exists within the United States for Chinese money launderers.
I'm assuming that as encryption gets more and more sophisticated, it's going to make it tougher and tougher to get at this. Am I right or wrong on that?
So it absolutely has made it tougher. So I think there's...
Well, and it continues to mature, too, the system by which they encrypt.
You're absolutely right, sir. It continues to mature. It continues to change. There's new apps. There's new technologies that from a legislative, and enforcement component, law enforcement is blinder in the dark, right? They're almost fighting this engagement with transnational organized crime as if we're back in the 1950s. And what I mean by that is they cannot, in a scaled approach, wiretap networks that operate within the world on any encrypted app, right? So it's the encrypted apps, like, I'm not going to identify them. The one I'll identify is WeChat, right? And there's an opportunity to engage on it because it's essentially a house of cards for Chinese money launderers and Chinese organized crime if you can impact their ability to utilize WeChat. So whether it's a negotiated strategy with the Chinese government or in theory you had the ability to wiretap it, if, for example, Chinese money launderers globally cannot use WeChat to communicate, it dramatically reduces their ability to launder funds in the efficient manners that I described earlier.
Thank you. Ms. Felbab-Brown, you mentioned the fact that the new administration in Mexico had upped their game to a degree when it comes to fighting this problem. Can you quantify that for us generally? I mean, is it a substantial upping of the game? Is it cosmetic? How would you characterize that?
I do believe it's a very substantial increase. However, the baseline during the López Obrador administration was very small. So there is certainly very much that remains to be done. But we see significant expansions of efforts to dismantle lab production, dismantling of labs. We see significant numbers of arrests. The Mexican government has deployed vast numbers of the National Guard to the borders with the United States, both to deal with migration, but also to be checking for the movement of fentanyl to the United States. And we see a variety of other efforts. I would say the most significant one, where we need to continue engaging Mexico, is expanding the role and authorities of U.S. law enforcement agents in Mexico, such as Homeland Security investigations agents, but also crucially Drug Enforcement Administration agents and more broadly. And certainly the government of Mexico, the Sheinbaum administration, is very interested in expanding capacities in going after money laundering. All of this, however, is taking place in the context of a country where criminal groups have, over the past 6 years, immensely expanded their power and control of territories, people, institutions, elections, and legal economies. So the challenge is absolutely massive, and the amount of resources dedicated by the Mexican government remains limited. So a very long way to go.
In your opinion, is what Mexico is doing, is it making a significant difference?
Yes, I think it's making significant difference. I don't think it's yet sufficient.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that a little bit, why do you think the Sheinbaum administration has taken a different approach? Have they heard from the people of Mexico that this is something that's not acceptable anymore?
The administration started taking this very expanded activity against Mexican cartels the moment it took office on October 1st. Clearly, there was a realization from within the administration that the security situation was deteriorating dramatically and that the criminal groups, that the power of the criminal groups over society and state was turning Mexico into a criminal state. I do believe that actions by the Trump administration, such as linking tariffs to fentanyl, were probably an additional very important impetus for the Mexican government to take certain actions, such as extraditing Rafael Caro Quintero and 28 other criminal groups to the United States. I am concerned, however, that if tariffs continue to be linked to a variety of objectives, the effectiveness and encouraging cooperation against fentanyl will be diluted if Mexico will feel that other objectives can satisfy the US, or that no matter what it does, it will still face tariffs.
So you mentioned the synthetic drug revolution, and I assume you're talking mostly about fentanyl there, but in New Hampshire, where we've had a huge issue with fentanyl, we are also seeing meth come back in the way that we saw it in the 80s. Are there other drugs that you would add to that category?
Well, absolutely. And Senator Shaheen, the meth that we are seeing today in the US market, and in fact globally, is far more potent than the meth of the 1980s. So in 2023, the number of people in the United States who died of meth overdose was over 20,000 people. I haven't seen the numbers for 2024, but I wouldn't be surprised if the number was higher. So methamphetamine produced in Mexico from precursors sent from China and India to Mexican cartels, precursors that are mostly non-scheduled drugs, and in fact, in the case of methamphetamine, are not scheduled drugs, very basic, common chemicals used in a variety of economies, is a significant problem. Europe is starting to grapple with nitazines, a class of synthetic opioids even more potent and deadly than fentanyls. Some nitazines are starting to arrive into the United States, originating in China and in India. And other parts of the world are seeing meth as well as a variety of novel substances, such as something called pink cocaine in Latin America, that has often no cocaine whatever and is a mixture of a variety of synthetic drugs.
One of the things that we've seen in New Hampshire is that, as horrible as fentanyl is, because we have antidotes and there's treatment, that people can at least get some help when they are misusing that substance. The same is not true for meth. And one of the things that we've heard from NIH is the research that's going on there to try and find some sort of a treatment for meth, and also an inoculation that helps address the whole issue of substance misuse. How important do you think that is? I should ask both of you this question. How important do you think that is that we are able to find successful treatments in order to help people who are impacted?
Treatment is absolutely fundamental to saving lives and improving lives, enabling communities to function well and see a reduction in crime. Evidence-based treatment that in the case of opioids centers on medications such as naloxone and buprenorphine is, in my view, the predominant reason why we have some 30,000 lives in the United States saved last year.
It's certainly the reason why we've seen overdose deaths in New Hampshire go down, because we've had done a very good job of distributing Narcan so that people and law enforcement, educators, the medical profession understand what to do when they see someone who is overdosed. Do you want to add to that, Mr. Urben?
I'll just second it, that in terms of funding and resources, these narcotics that are being sent to our country are so deadly, obviously, and are impacting in such a dramatic and negative way that the private sector solutions that you spoke about, ma'am, are needed to combat this, without question.
And you talked about the financing of cartels. How has cryptocurrency affected that? And if I could ask both of you to speak to, there's legislation that has passed the Senate now, and I don't think it's gone through the House yet, but it would provide some regulations around how cryptocurrencies are used. Is that positive in terms of dealing with the drug crisis we have, or is that going to make it worse? I've heard people on both sides comment on that. Mr. Urben?
In terms of crypto being used to launder funds?
Right.
So within the last 2-3 years, crypto has taken a much more substantial role in the laundering of funds. In the first component of the laundering cycle, where you're laundering the money from the United States back to Mexico and essentially back to the Mexican cartels, from my intelligence network, there's been a dramatic increase in terms of crypto being utilized to help complete that transaction. So additional, what I'll call traditional AML controls, compliance, high risk, red flag reporting is necessary within the crypto industry. So that type of legislation is critical, ma'am.
Thank you.
I fully second that. Cryptocurrencies have become a critical tool for criminal organizations, Mexican cartels, Brazilian criminal groups such as Primero Comando de Capital, but also Chinese criminal groups that have a wide panoply of mechanisms to launder money, but are very active in the cryptocurrency space. So any kind of tough regulations that bring law enforcement oversight, that prevent misuse of these currencies for criminal purposes is fundamental.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses. This is very helpful. So a couple of different topics. Dr. Felbab-Brown, I was glad to hear you say that you believe the current Mexican administration has been doing an improved job compared to the previous. That's heartening. What more, as we're in dialogue with Mexico over tariffs and other issues, what are more steps that we should be pressing them to take to continue this better direction?
Well, one of the most challenging and most important role is to be prosecuting political enablers, corrupt government officials, corrupt officials in security forces. That, of course, requires a set of tools, one of which is criminal investigation, such as in money laundering, but it also requires enabling the existence of a broader, healthy civil society, where investigative journalism is not suppressed, where freedom of speech,
Mexico has among the worst track record in the world in terms of the murder of journalists.
Absolutely. Where oversight bodies such as anti-corruption oversight bodies exist. And we see a significant reduction in independence and balance of checks and in a reduction in checks and balances in Mexico. So that's very concerning to me, even as we have an executive that is far more willing to go to the cartels. The broader environment that enables going after criminality is eroding in Mexico and continues to be eroding. And the second aspect is the one that I mentioned. Because of this pervasive culture of corruption, because of decades of complicity, it is essential that U.S. law enforcement agents are able to operate in Mexico in cooperation with Mexican government to be conducting investigations to prevent political manipulations and criminal intimidation. So expanded authority and presence are fundamental.
Thank you. So second question, much of the discussion today has focused on, as it should, TCOs and narcotics trafficking. But TCOs make an awful lot of money on human trafficking as well. You talked about kind of the broad spectrum of both legal and illegal activities. In some of my visits to the southern border, I've been told by U.S. officials that some of the cartels make more money on human trafficking than they do on narcotics trafficking. I have concerns that the current reorg at the State Department is reducing both the international narcotics control function and also the human trafficking function. Deputy Secretary Regas was with us last week and was saying we're trying to put more of these functions within the regional offices. But TCOs, for example, you've been using the example, Mr. Urben, of Mexican cartels with Chinese, money laundering. I'm not sure that the regional offices, I'm worried that the regional offices can't do the job of really tackling TCOs that operate in more than one region. And increasingly, it seems like a lot of the TCO activity is not just confined to a region, but is more global. Is that a fair concern?
Oh, I think it's definitely a fair concern. I mean, these are global networks that operate throughout the world, right? And that threat, obviously we're focused on the threat from Mexico, obviously in the United States, but the networks where essentially the Mexican cartels are in partnership with Chinese organized crime, Chinese money launderers. They work in concert together. So you need to attack these threats throughout the world where we can develop access points and the ability to leverage our resources to essentially dismantle them. So it's throughout our hemisphere. You can talk about Panama, you can talk about Colombia, you can talk about elsewhere around the globe, Africa, Southeast Asia, but the threat is similar, and it's what I like to call the Mexican cartel, Chinese organized crime playbook plays out throughout the world.
That is a concern I have, and I think we just need to monitor it as a committee when the reorganization is done. The thought that we can just take these areas of focus and just put them in the regional offices and they will be sufficient with a smaller footprint of staff, I deeply worry about it. Mr. Urben, I'm going to finish with you. Sometimes at hearings I like to ask not something that's not even about the hearing, but I just want to take advantage of an expertise. You have an expertise because you're long service with the DEA. There's a proposal that's been floated. I'm agnostic on it, but because I just haven't dug into it enough. There's a proposal that's been floated to consolidate the DEA and the ATF. In your professional opinion, good idea, bad idea, or what should we be looking at in such a proposal?
So in terms of consolidating, I think you have to maintain the DEA specifically at this point in time. The DEA has demonstrated over decades the most significant intelligence source network and the ability to take down transnational organized crime. And I could give you other examples, and I'm not just defending DEA because I'm a former agent. I'm looking for what's the best U.S. government apparatus to take down the Mexican cartels and Chinese money launderers. And in terms of the precision that you need the DEA at this specific point in time to do what we're talking about here today, right? They've done this against Hezbollah, they've done this against other foreign terrorist organizations, so I don't think you should change DEA in any way. Whether you were going to add ATF, there are complements in terms of the way DEA and ATF operate, in terms of who we target, how we gather evidence. But in terms of DEA itself, I don't think you can consolidate it and not allow it to operate as it is today.
Say what we should be looking at in any such proposal is if the proposal dilutes the mission or effectiveness right now, it would not be a good time to do that.
Yeah, there's no learning curve or time to stand up
Yeah.
new organizations, sir. So I agree with you.
Yep, thank you. I yield back.
Well, thank you to both of our witnesses for being here today. The ports of Balboa and Cristobal are gateways to the Panama Canal and have long been under control of the Hong Kong-based operator with deep ties to Communist China. That could change if BlackRock, hopefully, finalizes the deal to acquire 90% of the Panama Ports Company from C.K. Hutchinson, a strategic win for U.S. interests. But for years, Chinese state-backed port operators across the Americas have acted as front doors for transnational criminal activity. Ports controlled by Communist China lack transparency, and that's a feature of authoritarian regimes, not a bug. This allows organized crime to thrive by bribing custom agents, falsifying bills of lading, and moving illicit cargoes with ease. And obviously, we know of the issues of corruption in Communist China in general. We're seeing stolen metals from copper from Chile, iron ore from Mexico, coltan from Colombia, shipped to China through these ports. This two-way criminal trade feeds Communist China's raw material demand and fuels organized crime across our hemisphere. Add to that the fentanyl precursors moving through these ports, and the risks compound. Mr. Urben, a recent CSIS report highlighted how the PRC owned and operated ports in Latin America can harbor unique vulnerabilities and make them appealing to organized crime. Do you agree with that assessment?
I do.
I'm going to submit for the record this report from CSIS, Are Chinese Ports in Latin America Preferred by Organized Crime? And then, Mr. Urben, do you believe the United States should do more to ensure that ownership and operation of these ports is held by trusted entities, not Communist China?
I do.
What more can we be doing for the ports, because there's a number of them throughout Central and South America, what more can we do with regard to holding these port operators accountable for actually not allowing illegal materials to be transshipped through them?
Well, it's a key component, ports around the world, and during my time at SOD, when I talked about Chinese money laundering operations, I think I could spend a few seconds on, and it ties into a couple different things we're talking about. We noticed, right, we recognized through gathering information on Chinese money laundering networks that there was what I call the Chinese playbook in terms of Chinese influence operations around the world. And we saw a consistent pattern where we saw two things. One, wherever you saw an infrastructure product, whether it was a Belt and Road Initiative announced project or an infrastructure product to build something, let's say in Africa or in this hemisphere, there was a parallel effort by Chinese organized crime in those same jurisdictions like Panama, like Colombia, and elsewhere, other important allied countries, where that parallel effort was designed to corrupt local and regional components of that government. So obviously, I completely agree. From the national security perspective, a key aspect of the Panama Canal and Panama itself, and when we talk about transnational organized crime, the movements of money, the movements of human smuggling, and the funds associated with that, that parallel effort by Chinese organized crime in a jurisdiction like Panama is designed to corrupt local and state government officials as well as port operations themselves. So for obvious reasons, I agree with my background in DEA that ports are a key component that we need to control and have rule of law throughout the world, especially in national security interest countries like Panama.
Great, thank you. We're facing a national security crisis that goes far beyond open borders and overdoses. Chinese money laundering networks have quietly become the financial backbone of the Western Hemisphere's deadliest cartels. These networks are laundering hundreds of millions of dollars in drug proceeds, propping up fentanyl supply that has killed over 80,000 Americans just last year. These launderers exploit our financial system's vulnerabilities with surgical precision, using counterfeit passports, fake businesses, and rapid-fire bank deposits across dozens of states. And they do it faster, cheaper, and more discreetly than transnational criminal networks, traditional criminal networks, rather. This is not just organized crimes, it's transnational exploitation with communist Chinese fingerprints all over it. And it's not happening in secret. It's happening in strip malls and bank lobbies in broad daylight while law enforcement plays whack-a-mole with our financial system struggling to keep up. Dr. Felbab-Brown, how are Chinese money brokers operating so successfully, and which methods are we least equipped to respond to?
One of the biggest advantages Chinese money laundering networks have is that they can utilize trade-based money laundering, under-invoicing and over-invoicing to launder money. That is uniquely available to them because China does business around the world. So a Bolivian money laundering operation cannot justify so easily operations to Mongolia or Kenya. Moreover, the ability of Chinese underground banking system to avoid international wires is another enormous advantage, with money moving is only within the United States, only within China, only within the source country where money is being laundered, such as Mexico. US law enforcement and Law Enforcement International is becoming more aware of the enormous speed with which Chinese money laundering networks catapulted themselves to the top of money launderers, not just in the Asia-Pacific region, where they have been at the top for 20 plus years, 30 years, but also in the United States, in Canada, and in Europe. And countering them must be a core objective, including because it's a very significant source of intelligence on other criminal groups and state sponsors.
Great. Thank you very much. I've got additional questions I'll submit for the record. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Senator, and thank both of you for your testimony on how we can better crack down on transnational gang violence. Some of us have been at this issue for a very long time. About 20 years ago, I formed a regional anti-gang task force with Congressman Frank Wolf from Virginia at the time to crack down on Central American gangs, primarily MS-13. But it does make it more difficult for us to crack down on gangs like MS-13 when leaders in their home countries are actually working against us. And that includes President Bukele in El Salvador. In 2020, the Salvadorian news outlet El Faro reported that Bukele's officials secured deals with MS-13 to reduce homicides, but in exchange for prison privileges and political support. Dr. Felbab, is it true that in December 2021, the U.S. Department of Treasury validated this report by imposing global Magnitsky sanctions on 2 senior Bukele officials for their roles in making these deals?
I saw the indictment, yes.
Right. And beyond that, and additional evidence came to light. In 2023, there was a DOJ indictment that revealed that Bukele's government helped an MS-13 gang leader known as Crook avoid extradition to the United States. Bukele officials even set him up in a luxury apartment and assisted in his escape out of El Salvador. Do you remember those reports?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And would you agree, Doctor, that blocking extraditions to the United States and aiding fugitives makes President Bukele often an unreliable partner when it comes to fighting transnational crime?
Certainly, if negotiations with criminal groups lead to political advantages, if they enable corruption, if they operate outside of the rule of law, and if they prevent disclosure of significant compromising evidence, this is very concerning as to what kind of partner such an individual, in this case President of El Salvador, could be in combating organized crime groups.
Well, I want to pick up on what you just said about preventing the disclosure of very important information to hold criminals accountable. Because when President Trump came to office his second time around, he made a deal with President Bukele, where President Bukele agreed to imprison in CICOT, a notorious prison, people who were taken from the United States in violation of their due process rights. Less attention has been paid to what President Bukele got in exchange. What he got in exchange was that President Trump ordered federal prosecutors to drop charges that were pending against MS-13 people who were in United States custody, had been charged with crimes. They were in U.S. custody. They were awaiting trial in the United States. And instead of having them stand trial and have information come out at that trial about the collusion between MS-13 and President Bukele, President Trump sent them back to El Salvador. Isn't that right?
Yes, my understanding from reporting by New York Times and other outlets is that this is indeed what has been part of the deal. And certainly the lack of disclosure that the charged individuals would provide in cooperating with U.S. law enforcement authorities or in U.S. courts is, in my view, significant blow to countering organized crime groups and, crucially, to countering the political collusion that enables it in a fundamental way.
No, I agree with you 100%. I think it sends a very dangerous message to U.S. law enforcement that when they're in the middle of making a case against MS-13 gang members here in the United States, rather than take them to trial and get that testimony and evidence, they get sent back to El Salvador, where they're effectively silenced. That testimony doesn't come to light. We've seen El Faro, one of the newspapers in El Salvador that has brought these things to light, being heavily persecuted by Bukele's government, all sorts of harassment. We just, within the last few weeks, saw Cristosal, which is a very important human rights organization in El Salvador, leave El Salvador because of their fear of retaliation by Bukele for their anti-corruption reporting. If you could just close where you began, really, which is saying that when you have this corruption, it does undermine our efforts to combat gang violence and puts more Americans at risk.
Absolutely. Anti-organized crime activities are fundamental to the health and well-being of society, but they need to take place within the rule of law. All too often, anti-crime campaigns become mechanisms of political repression that targets any kind of opponents. And for anti-crime efforts to be effective, they need to be strictly consistent with human rights, laws, civil rights, and they need to foster civil society openness, investigative journalism, and oversight by groups such as NGOs.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you both. Thank you, Mr. Thanks, Senator.
Senator Cornyn.
Thank you all for being here. If there's one conclusion that I've drawn from the general subject matter we're discussing here, it is that we are losing. We're losing. And so if the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome, what should we be doing differently? And I'd like both of you to comment on that, but specifically, in my time here in the Senate, I've observed that the most successful counter-drug efforts that the United States has ever engaged in has been Plan Colombia, although obviously Colombia continues to have many problems, as do many of the countries we're talking about, whether it's corruption, obviously the money that Americans spend on illegal drugs is a huge magnet. But what should we be doing differently? Maybe Mr. Urben, would you start with you?
Sure. So I certainly agree with your statement, sir. I think in the last 6 months, we have an opportunity to start to impact the cartels and start to achieve some semblance of success. And before I came in here today, I said, what would success look like in 18 months? And I think specifically, we need to be specific with Mexico. So one is extraditions or expulsions or whatever they're going to call it. Those 29 that they sent back to us earlier this year was a very significant event. That needs to be done on a monthly basis, right? So if there's several hundred extraditions pending, they need to be sent back to us in a timely manner, or sent to us, I should say. Anyone else that's a mid-level cartel member or higher should be indicted, and again, expelled or extradited from Mexico in a timely manner. That would have a dramatic impact on the cartels.
That was a big deal when Mexico extradited the 29 individuals. So my experience has been that this has been a huge obstacle, is to just getting through the Mexican legal process with all the avenues for escape that people have. So you think more extraditions would be significant?
Well, it played out with what you mentioned in terms of Plan Colombia with the AUC and the FARC. Those were successes once we started to extradite those individuals to the United States 20 years ago. If we did the 29 that we did on a monthly basis over the next 18 months, you would have a dramatic impact on the Mexican cartel's ability to operate. And the costs are limited in what we have to put out there, and we can get these people back here. And they'll also cooperate with us, some of them, and expose the corruption that we're talking about here today that's systemic within Mexico.
Doctor?
Let me reiterate, Senator Cornyn, 3 points I made. One is focusing on the middle layer of criminal groups. That could well be done through enabling their extradition. Extraditions are particularly meaningful when they reveal political collusions and sponsors in government. So I hope that out of the extraditions of Ovidio Guzman and El Chapo and El Mayo, we will see revelations as part of plea deals and court proceedings as to the political cover that criminal groups in Mexico enjoy. The second element I would emphasize is going not just after drugs, but after the wide set of economic activities that criminal groups engage in. And I thank you for your sponsorship of the Gold and Mining Act, which starts to be addressed in a very important way one of the components of economies into which criminal groups around Latin America and beyond Latin America have become engaged. And the third is enabling the entire structure of rule of law, which is where Plan Colombia comes in again. In my view, the most successful element of Plan Colombia was helping to rebuild an absolutely shattered and intimidated justice system in Colombia, to be far more independent, far heftier, helping to rebuild police forces. So having mechanisms and tools, agencies in the United States that enable this broader spectrum of infrastructure and system to counter rule of law and enable and counter criminality and enable rule of law is fundamental.
Thank you. Mr. Urben, as you know, there are vetted units within the Mexican Army and the Mexican Navy that work together with U.S. intelligence services to target some of these fentanyl labs, among other drug labs and the like. Do you think it would be helpful to have additional training opportunities here in the United States for those vetted units?
Absolutely. We need to dramatically increase our funding and the opportunities to train these Mexican vetted units here as much as possible before they go back and start to engage the cartels and the elements of corruption that's already been described. I think essentially, compared to what we've done in the past and the opportunities that we see now in terms of engaging the cartels, we need to go all in on the judicial components within Mexico. So standing up those vetted units will be a long-term gain for us, not just on the Mexican cartels over the next 18 months, but using those vetted units to gather judicial evidence, right, to prosecute these cartel leadership entities in the future.
Thank you. My time is up.
Senator Shaheen, I believe you wanted to ask another question?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to do another round. Just to follow up on that question about law enforcement training, Senator Portman, when he was here, and I passed legislation that was aimed at combating the flow of fentanyl and other synthetic drugs into the United States. And what it did was to establish an international exchange program that was focused on demand reduction and strengthening law enforcement's capacity in other countries to address synthetic drugs. It's sadly one of the programs that's been eliminated by the cuts at the State Department. But let me ask you, Dr. Felbab-Brown, and you may want to speak to this too, Mr. Urben, where have we been successful in Latin America with anti-narcotics programming?
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. We started speaking about one. I would say that components of Plan Colombia were successful. In my view, the most important success was in rebuilding Colombia's justice system, in rebuilding the national police, and in building internal structures and systems that enabled revelations of collusion, such as the parapolitics scandal. I do think that extradition were an important success, as were building special interdiction units. However, they are limited in their effectiveness if the overall system remains corrupt and disables them when they start going after political sponsors of crime. which is where the second success, at least temporarily in my view, was CICIG, the counter-corruption commission that existed in Guatemala, was sponsored and funded by USAID and fostered by the international community. When it was operational, it was precisely helping to bring down the infrastructure of political collusion and political protection. And when it became effective, tragically, it was dismantled by the government of Colombia. I would also say that one of the really important issues is not just having special interdictions unit, but a broader capacity and at minimum broader cooperation of law enforcement agencies. In Mexico, a big problem has been that municipal police forces are often under the thumb of criminal groups. USAID programs in places like Chihuahua and Oaxaca were one of the most successful efforts at reducing the corruption, increasing the capacity of local law enforcement units. Unfortunately, those programs have gone away. And finally, this is outside just of Latin America, but I think it's really important to emphasize the multilateral component. We spoke a lot about the role of China. I would emphasize also the role of India as sources of precursor chemicals as well as entire finished synthetic drugs. And there, the global coalition against the threat of synthetic drugs that the Biden administration erected was having very significant role in bringing together global awareness and global pressures on actors such as China and India. And if it's going to wither, that would significantly reduce the ability to shape both the global environment and specifically the actions of countries that we need to shape, like China.
Thank you. Mr. Urben, I know that DEA has cooperated with the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement in the past. How important do you think that kind of cooperation is as we're looking at trying to address transnational criminal organizations and cartels?
So the need to work jointly with INL to stand up units around the world where we can judicially acquire information has been one of the cornerstones of DEA's success. You have to have this. It's a critical element in terms of building capacity within those countries, but then that joint relationship, whether they're prosecuted in their home countries or brought back to the United States, it's been a critical component over many, many years. So there's a real need for that we've already established within this hemisphere, but it's used throughout the world. I spent 10 of my 25 years overseas, and there's always been an important component of INL funding to do this.
So the budget that's been proposed by the administration for the upcoming year would cut INL by 83%. Do you think that will have an impact on that ability to cooperate?
Yes, unless it's not funded through some other mechanism, that those funds need to be there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you to all of our witnesses. I appreciate both of you taking the time today to attend our hearing and providing us with the benefit of your testimony. For the information of the members, the record will remain open until the close of business tomorrow, July 24th. We ask the witnesses to respond as promptly as possible. Your responses will also be part of the record. With the thanks of the committee, this hearing is now adjourned.